Imagine standing alone in a small room with no distractions, no music, no phone, no chatter, only your breathing and the slow, inexorable passage of time. The world outside demands speed, noise, and endless commentary, yet something in you begins to notice how thin the surface of your life has become. What if the way out of that thinness is not to add more, but to remove more? What if the path to steadiness, clarity, and true mental health is a subtraction rather than an addition? In the next half hour, we will travel through the quiet, disciplined world of ancient Japanese wisdom and the Stoic temperament that shaped men like Miyamoto Musashi. We will follow a single modern life as it is reshaped by small, non-negotiable rituals, elimination strategies, and an identity forged in silence. This is not a tale of sudden triumph. It is the slow, deliberate work of becoming less scattered, less reactive, and more present. Miyamoto Musashi is the first figure to walk onto this stage, not because he is a glorified hero, but because his life is a study in the disciplined mind. Born in the late 16th century, Musashi fought more than 60 duels and never lost a single one. What mattered most to him was not the outward victory, but the inner method. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, a text that is at once practical and philosophical, insisting that to master the way of the sword is to master the way of the self. In his teaching is a radical insistence. The warrior must strip away illusions, distractions, and emotional flares so that perception is clear and action is precise. This stripping is not cruelty to the self. It is an austerity that makes room for truth. From the same soil grew the ethical code of Bushido and the quiet, penetrating practice of Zen. Zen is not clerical or ornamental. It is a method for cultivating a mind that sees without attachment. Bushido is not merely a set of rules for warriors. It is a living architecture for character. Together, these traditions offer a framework for mental health that flies in the face of modern therapy's tendency to endlessly analyze feelings. The ancient path asks a different question. What habits, what systems, and what daily disciplines will transform the person who experiences suffering into someone who meets it with steadiness? To make these teachings concrete, meet Hana. She is in her mid-30s, a product manager living in a city that never seems to sleep. Her days are crowded with meetings, her nights blurring into scrolling, and her mind is a constant theater of anxious thoughts about productivity, success, and faint but persistent shame that she is not doing enough. On the surface, she appears competent and composed. Beneath, she is eroding. Her sleep is punctuated by stress dreams. Her relationships feel shallow because she is always half present. Friends describe her as busy, a compliment that carries the weight of a confession. She comes to this practice not because she is dramatic or broken, but because she is tired of the small fractures in her life, compounding into a slow emptiness. The first lesson she encounters is elimination. In the language of Bushido, one who is to act must first clear the field of concern. For Hana, this is not a dramatic purge. It is the patient decision to remove one habitual stimulus that consistently scatters her attention: the evening scroll. She decides, quietly and without fanfare, that after dinner she will not pick up her phone. No playlist, no news feed, no constant checking. In a world that treats attention as currency, this is an act that feels almost subversive. At first, the silence after dinner is loud. Her hands reach for a device out of force of habit, and the urge is clinical in its intensity. But she repeats the action, and with repetition comes a change in the baseline of experience. The elimination does not immediately make her happier. Instead, It gives her access to a different kind of discomfort, one where she must sit with her own thoughts. The second lesson is small, non-negotiables. Musashi's life was composed of countless small disciplines, a precise stance, a certain way of holding the sword, the daily repetition of kata that embedded skill into muscle. Similarly, Hana adopts 3 non-negotiable acts that ground her morning. The first is a 10-minute seated breathing practice, done without music or guided narration. The second is a single page of deliberate reading, poetry or a classical text, read slowly with the intent to understand rather than to consume. The third is a daily ritual of making tea in silence, with the hands attending to heat, sound, and motion. These acts are chosen for their simplicity and repeatability. They are not grand commitments that can be postponed by a busy day. They are agreements with herself that cannot be traded away. Where modern self-help is often contagious optimism, the samurai approach is sober realism. It insists on practicing strength through small frictions. In Hana's life, the 10 minutes of breathing at first amplifies anxiety, because silence allows anxious loops to surface. Yet this is precisely the point. In the samurai mind, one sits in the ring with discomfort to learn its shape. The breath becomes a mirror, each inhale a fact, each exhale a choice to return. Over weeks, those 10 minutes do their quiet work. Hana begins to note the spaces between her thoughts. She recognizes patterns she once mistook for truth. The voice that says, "You are late," or "You are not enough," was not a verdict, but a habit of thought. Identity is central to this transformation. Stoic teachers and samurai alike emphasize the forging of self through long, disciplined habit, rather than persuasive self-talk. The question shifts from "How do I feel?" to "Who do I want to be?" And then to "What does that person do every day without negotiation?" For Hana, the answer becomes not an abstract ideal but a set of actions. She becomes the person who honors the evening without screens, who does the morning rituals, and who speaks once a day to an elderly neighbor on her way to work. Each action rewires her identity. She no longer convinces herself of change with hope. She demonstrates it with consistent, tiny proofs. There is a third principle that anchors this teaching: presence through silence. Zen practice makes clear that silence is not mere absence of sound, but a different mode of listening and awareness. For the samurai, the silence before battle sharpened perception. In ordinary life, the silence within an hour frees the mind from the tyrannies of immediate reactivity. Hana learns to structure her day around pockets of disciplined silence, a 50-minute block of focused work with the phone off, a walk without music between meetings, and an evening reflection that is not a checklist but a quiet accounting of the day's tone. These silences are not escapes. They are training grounds. She discovers that without these deliberate intervals, her mind becomes a melee of small, urgent demands, each vying to be heard. We must also speak of surrender. The word sounds soft in the tradition of warriors, yet it carries power. Surrender here does not mean defeat. It means relinquishing the illusion of complete control. Musashi's method entailed surrender to form and practice. One surrenders to the regimen of repetition because the discipline becomes a greater force than the self that resists. For Hana, surrender manifests as accepting limitations, time, energy, attention, and building her days within those bounds. This is not resignation, but a strategic embrace of constraint. It is choosing to become excellent at a few things, instead of superficially competent at many. Parallel to surrender is the Stoic habit of negative visualization, though in the samurai register it appears as constant readiness. The warrior contemplates loss not to induce dread, but to neutralize it. Hana adopts a related practice. Each night she imagines the next day's small setbacks and rehearses her response calmly. A delayed meeting, an email that might sting, a plan that might fail. Each scenario is met with a thought-through action. This quiet rehearsal curbs anxiety because it replaces surprise with preparedness. She learns the strange virtue of expecting friction and regarding it as an opportunity to practice steadiness. A crucial pivot in this story is the encounter with moral solitude. Samurai training could be solitary by necessity. Mastery requires time away from applause. Modern life valorizes the social, the visible, the liked. Yet true inner strength often grows in obscurity. For months, Hana's practices are private, uncelebrated. She does not post about them. She does not use them to signal virtue. There is a severe clarity in this concealment. The work becomes about her capacity rather than about others' approval. Over time, the quality of her attention changes. Her conversations deepen because she is less anxious for surface approval, and the commitments she makes to neighbors, to friends, become steadier because they are not tools for identity, but manifestations of it. We must examine the role of ritual and form. The samurai did not mistake ritual for essence. They saw ritual as a vessel. The form shapes the mind. A tea ceremony, a bow, the careful dressing of armor. All of these embed discipline into action. In Hana's life, the making of tea, the deliberate walking without audio, the 10-minute breath practice are forms. Initially, they feel mechanical, like a costume. But the longer she practices, the more the form becomes transparent, and what was once emotion becomes a way of being. The transformation is not immediate. It is a deep, incremental change, the accumulation of repeated choices that alter neural architecture and temperament. Another pillar is the cultivation of patience. Samurai wisdom is an argument against the momentary and the sensational. It prescribes a pace that respects the slow alchemy of habit. In contemporary culture, impatience is normalized. Instant results, fast feedback, immediate validation. Hana relearns time. She schedules projects in seasons instead of sprints, measures progress in meaningful weekly metrics rather than hourly checks, and accepts that some changes are invisible for the first month. Patience is not passivity. It is the disciplined refusal to be hurried by ephemeral anxieties. An underappreciated element is the discipline of speech. Bushido admonishes restraint of words because speech reveals the interior. The Stoic maxim asks us to make speech useful and measured. Hana decides to speak less about herself in public settings. She answers with fewer stories about anxiety or overwork and learns instead to ask better questions and to listen more. The result is unexpected. By speaking less, she finds clarity in thought, and others respond with more openness. Her internal noise diminishes because she no longer fuels it with endless narration. We must also address the economy of choices. Musashi often emphasized decisive action. When decisions are clear and quick, the mind is free for other duties. For modern life, this translates into a daily architecture of elimination, deciding what to refuse, so there is space for what matters. Hana applies an economy of choices to her wardrobe, her emails, and her calendar. By simplifying, she decreases friction. Her mornings cease to be battlegrounds of indecision because she wears a limited set of clothing that fits the life she wants to lead. Her email policy is strict, a handful of times per day, and only for matters that require synchronous attention. These eliminations are not about asceticism for its own sake. They are pragmatic acts to salvage attention. Let us attend now to the darker, necessary part of this work: confrontation with fear. Samurai training put men face to face with death, not to glorify dying but to free life from the paralysis of fear. The Stoic exercises similarly asked practitioners to imagine loss so that they could live without trembling for it. Hana confronts a personal fear, the possibility that she will stay in a safe but unfulfilling career for years. Rather than react with desperation, she constructs a modest plan, one 40-minute deep work block each day devoted to a craft she cares about, a monthly short course, and a quarterly piece of public work completed without expectation of praise. These measures are small but decisive. They acknowledge fear and use it to generate disciplined action, moving her out of passive dissatisfaction and into intentional shaping. A decisive moment arrives when Hana faces relational strain. A long friendship is fraying because she has been distant and distracted. Where she might once have reflexively tried to soothe with apologies and promises, she approaches the conversation with samurai steadiness. She sits in silence, listens more than she speaks, and commits to one clear, non-negotiable change: twice monthly, undisturbed visits. She does not overpromise. The honesty is modest, but believable because it is backed by ritual. The friend responds not with immediate warmth, but with cautious relief. Over months, the trust is rebuilt because Hana's new identity shows up reliably. We should not romanticize the path. There are backslides. Years of scattered habits do not vanish with discipline. There are flat, gray days when the breath practice feels empty, and the tea ceremony a hollow motion. The samurai would call these days tests of resolve, not moral failures. When Hana falters, she returns to fundamentals: elimination, put the phone away; presence, 10 minutes sitting; small, non-negotiable actions, make the tea; and a readiness to accept the humbling lesson that progress is not linear. She learns to recalibrate without self-condemnation, a Stoic humility that recognizes the limits of willpower while trusting the cumulative power of practice. An essential technique that bridges Stoicism and samurai practice is the morning precept. Musashi and others kept brief, clear rules to orient the day. Hana crafts her own precept: observe breath, attend to one task at a time, speak the truth plainly. She writes it on a small card and returns to it each morning as part of the 10-minute practice. The precept is not meant to be a moral yardstick that produces shame. It is a compass that short-circuits indecision. It binds identity to action. We now come to the transformation's quieter fruits. Over a year, Hana's sleep deepens, not because she eliminated stress completely, but because her relationship with stress has changed. She no longer amplifies it with ruminations. She treats it as training stimulus. Her work output becomes steadier and deeper because she has learned to protect large blocks of attention. Her interactions are less performative and more present. Anxiety remains, like a weather pattern that shifts with conditions, but it no longer dictates the contours of her life. Musashi's ultimate lesson is not about weapons or duels. It is about seeing clearly. When one sees clearly, one's movements are less wasteful, one's words weigh less, and one's commitments remain intact. The Stoic echo of this is the cultivation of an untroubled mind through disciplined habit and prepared acceptance. Mental health, from this perspective, is not a goal achieved through external fixes, but an internal architecture built brick by slow brick. Habits that cut away distraction, rituals that steady the day, and a humble, martial patience that honors failure as feedback. In closing, consider the scale of small acts. The samurai did not become who they were through sudden revelation, nor did they achieve mental poise by thinking it into being. They trained daily in forms that seem unglamorous to modern eyes until the form dissolved into natural conduct. If you are to take one practice from this teaching, let it be the insistence on one small, non-negotiable action that you will perform daily without announcement. Choose it, practice it, and then resist the urge to tell the world about it. Let it be the quiet place where your identity is proven. There is peace in subtraction. There is clarity in constraint. There is power in a steady, unflashy regimen that honors the ancient discipline of presence. The warrior and the thinker offer us not a hero's arc, but an apprentice's pledge. To show up, to eliminate what scatters, to cultivate silence, and to shape a life by the repeated modest acts that withstand time. In the quiet room, with a hand on the bowl of warm tea and the breath meeting itself, the mind sheds its thinness and returns to what matters. This is mental health as craft, practiced like any skill, patient, austere, and ultimately life-giving.